welcome back everybody to On the Ball, the video interview series from the Vanderbilt Sports and Society Initiative. Really happy to have Ken Reed with us today from League of Fans and an author. His new book, or new out in paperback, is How We Can Save Sports, which I read on the airplane to and from Tucson recently, and really enjoyed the book. Ken, congratulations on the new edition.
Well, thank you. Yeah, we updated it and wrote a new introduction and added a few resources to it. So hopefully it does well.
Yeah, and you joke early in the book that, I mean, you've got some recommendations on how our society can be smarter, about how we approach sports, but it doesn't mean that you are a sports hater,
Yeah.
And I see your Brooklyn Dodgers cap there, your ABA basketball behind you. I know you played college baseball and basketball. I mean, tell us a little bit about your sports background before we get into how we can improve things.
Well, it is kind of ironic that some people think I'm out to take down sports or I'm a sports hater, because it's just the opposite. I love sports. My dad was a middle school coach and counselor, and I played multiple sports: baseball, basketball, football, golf, tennis growing up, and love sports. And just as I was going through school, I got a master's in sports administration and a doctorate in sports management. And just the more I saw of what's going on in sports, the more upset I became, because I think sport is so valuable as a cultural practice, and there are so many positives that can come from it. But what I discovered is that almost all the issues we're facing, and some we'll talk about today, are driven by the win at all cost mentality or profit at all cost mentality that really hinder some of the key stakeholders in sports.
Yeah, and one of the things you mentioned in setting up this whole discourse in your book is that being critical of sports is kind of like the best tribute you can give to it, in the same way as patriotism, in a way. I mean, it doesn't mean you don't love your country if you notice what's wrong with it and you're trying to improve it. And I got the sense that's really, that's kind of the root of your philosophy.
Yeah, there's a great Robert Kennedy quote in my book, which I can't remember now verbatim, but basically it's similar to what you said. If you love your country, the best thing you can do is to fight to make it better. And that's how I feel about sports.
Mm-hmm. And the other thing that I really related to in the setup to the book was just the idea that sports is a worthy subject to study. I remember when I was in college, and my introduction to Perry Wallace, who I later wrote a book about, was writing a paper about him for a Black history course here. And I was concerned when I went to my professor with this idea that she might say, well, we don't write about basketball in college. We don't write about basketball player athletes. That's not serious enough academics. But I think you make a couple points, in quoting others in the book too, that there are very few areas of life, especially in this country, that potentially bring people together, at least around a shared experience, whether they come with different worldviews or not. They're at least experiencing the same thing in terms of the game or watching the athletes on TV. More than any other really institution in our country. And the second piece of that, given the prominence of sports, how little serious inquiry really is given to it. Maybe the sort of the horse race coverage of the scores, or some features on athletes, but not really investigation into how it's affecting life when so many people are affected by sports. I wondered if you could just expand on those notions a little bit.
Well, apologize for that.
No problem.
I thought I put my phone on silent, but yeah, I think academia and the sports media are at fault in terms of just glorifying it. I think Howard Cosell called it sports syndrome, where people involved in sports just sanctify it, that everything's perfect, there's nothing serious to be looked at. Academia, I mean, sports is a multi-billion-dollar industry, and besides being a cultural practice that impacts almost all of us, whether we're sports fans or not, it deserves serious inquiry. And I think academia is finally doing that. There's more and more sports management programs around the country. At one time there was basically 2 or 3 of them, and now there's probably 100 or so. The problem with that is I think a lot of that is just promoting the current system and not serious looks at sport as a cultural practice like you're doing there at Vanderbilt. And I think we need more sports sociology, contemporary sports issues kind of classes, and those type of classes should be required as part of sports management programs as well. And in terms of the media, I think, unfortunately, sports media is tied into everything that goes on in sports today. I mean, ESPN basically runs all the college football bowl games now, and it's hard for them to be objective in looking at sports issues. There's some good programs that they have, but very minor issues. I mean, minor shows in terms of looking at what's right, what's wrong with sports. So I think the sports media need to step up and write about more than trades and coaches who get fired and things like that, and look at some of these issues in a little more depth.
Yeah, I would agree. And some of the you mentioned the ESPN, like Outside the Lines, a type of show that you're referring to, or
right.
They've started Andscape, as it's known now, formerly the Undefeated. There's First and Pen out there. There's certain writers. I know Patrick Ruby, is somebody that quoted a few times in your book. Dave Zirin. It seems like it's growing, but it's still sort of on the fringes of what most people are consuming every day.
And in a way, it's natural because people enjoy sports as their escape from all the day-to-day issues they have to deal with, and they don't want serious issues being talked about when they're relaxing watching sports. But unfortunately, the sports page has sometimes become as dreary as the front page.
Right. Well, I want to ask you about that. I think you were, I don't know if you said this, if you're quoting someone, that we can accept sports for what they are, or use sports to make the world a better place. And like, just to be a little bit of a contrarian, like, why is it up to sports to make the world a better place? Is there some value in it being an escape from the rest of life?
Well, I don't know if it's up to sports to make the world a better place, but I think sport, like all areas of life, has a role in having a positive impact on society. Sport is, we touched on a little earlier, one of the few things in our culture that's a cultural practice. Take away the money. I mean, exercise, playing, recreation. There's so much of sports that's beyond just the business side that we see so much of today, that sport can be positive in terms of getting people of all parts of society together, participating, exercising. I mean, obesity is a huge problem in this country. We can talk about what's going on with schools dropping physical education and things like that. There's just so many things that we can do better to impact sport in a more positive way, I believe.
Absolutely. I mean, I agree. And I think about even just the case of basketball, which I've written 2 books about the beginnings of Olympic basketball, one on the first men's team in the United States, one on the first women's. And James Naismith and the invention of basketball is a big part of that. I know when he invented the game, he really just saw it as a chance for exercise, for students who were stuck in the gym really without much to do all winter. And then the game is seen as improving as it becomes more of a varsity competition, with spectators and tournaments, and then eventually television coverage, but really you could look at that as not a success story, but as getting away from what the real value could have been, with, a sport for all and for exercise, as opposed to a spectator only sport. And then, like you talk about in the book, the win at all cost and profit at all cost attitudes that have taken over.
Yeah, if you read about James Naismith, it's very interesting. He had no desire to commercialize basketball at all. And like you said, he wanted to use it as a way to get not just boys and men at the time, but women involved playing basketball as an athletic endeavor to make people healthier. I mean, he invented it at the YMCA to get people active. And he was very much against, he didn't cash in at all on being the inventor of basketball, which in a way is kind of sad, but it shows that he stuck to his principles.
Yeah, for sure. At the same time I say that, I feel like a total hypocrite. Like, I love college basketball. I love being a fan at the games. March Madness is starting today. Like, a lot of people are going to be doing very little work and watching those games on TV, and I'll probably be among them, so, I can look at these academically or philosophically, these issues, but I feel like part of the problem probably that you have, or that you feel with League of Fans, is even the people who might agree with everything you're saying, like how do you get them to change their behavior? You know, because sports can be so all consuming, and you know, we might act differently than we say that we believe in our heads.
Well, once again, I think the world of academia has gone to revenue at all costs. I mean, when you see like these conference realignments where schools like USC and UCLA are leaving the Pac-12 and their historic rivalries and going to the Big Ten, and Texas and Oklahoma going to the Southeast Conference, it's all about money, and it has nothing to do with the well-being of the student athlete, because now these students are going to have to travel, in the case of UCLA and USC, all the way to Rutgers and Maryland to play volleyball games, you know, and it has nothing to do with betterment of the athlete or the academic experience. I think college sports is great. I enjoy it too. I'll be watching the games today, but I think it's just gotten so out of control that things like in high schools, especially intramurals, have been dropped. Rec sports are falling down, and kids are having to either play club sports that cost a lot or not participate anymore. It's becoming an elite thing. And I think one of the things that schools could be doing a lot better is getting everyone involved instead of just focusing on varsity athletics. I mean, before after school intramurals used to be a big thing. Now they're gone. PE classes are being dropped. And if we think sports has some value, which I do, then we should try to get all of them involved. There's a small college, I'm not sure where it is. I think it's Spelman College that actually dropped their varsity program so they could put that money to intramural type programs for every student being involved. And I don't
That's
think we need
interesting.
to do that, but there's this high school in Illinois, Naperville, where they have daily physical education classes. They also have intramurals and varsity sports, and they do a good job with all of them. So if we focus on all stakeholders, what's best for all stakeholders, I think we can enjoy the elite level athletics as well.
Okay, yeah, a greater balance. And so
Right.
in reading your book, for those who haven't read it, I'd encourage you to check it out. But you know, each chapter takes on a different issue, sort of stating the problems and then your solutions. And I think you said that the number one problem, the most important issue is CTE, you know, and brain injury. And you said that we might be focusing on the wrong thing there. Can you explain what you mean by that?
Well, every year, League of Fans, where I work as sports policy director, we come up a list of the 10 most important issues we think. And for the last 10 years, it's been CTE and brain trauma. And the focus has been on two things: the NFL and somewhat college and NHL, but also focusing just on concussions. What the recent research is showing that it's possibly or quite likely the repetitive subconcussive impacts that athletes get over and over that don't cause concussions, but eventually lead to things like chronic traumatic encephalopathy or CTE. So especially at the high school and youth level, where we have practices and games with no medical personnel at all, no trainers, etc., we have to look at a lot more ways to limit brain impact and not just concussions, but the repetitive hits from like linemen get in football, or headers, constant header practice in soccer and things like that.
And one of the solutions you have, I'm sure, is you know, very provocative, and is to ban football at the middle school and the high school level. Why did you suggest that?
Well, yeah, out of the whole book, that's the most pushback I've received. And the reason is, I'm not saying ban football from private schools or even private clubs, but you're paying for middle school and high schools with with public tax dollars to enhance the brain, enhance education. And the evidence is overwhelming that football causes brain damage and is the antithesis of growing the brain and knowledge of the student. So I just think that football could be moved to club sports or extracurricular activities outside the school system, and we focus on activities, sports, and other physical activities within the school that have no negative impact. In fact, there's a lot of sports, running, swimming, have been shown to actually grow brain cells and have a positive effect. So I just, the basic idea is that we shouldn't spend tax dollars on something that's proven to cause damage to the brain.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to at least put officials on the spot and justify it, right? Give
Yeah,
them
I
the
think
data.
what's going to happen is it's going to be like a Mothers Against Drunk Drivers. I think eventually there'll be so much information out there that parents are going to fight against it in schools. And I think they're going to push administrators to justify why we're spending all these dollars on an activity that causes brain damage. The other problem is insurance companies are going to start charging more and more to school districts because there's going to be lawsuits that, you know, playing this kid played this sport and then parents are going to sue the school district. So it's getting more and more expensive to continue sponsoring football in public schools.
Okay. So, a suggestion that some people might see as impractical, you actually maybe see as inevitable over the next 10 or 20 years?
Yeah, I think eventually there won't be publicly financed football in middle schools and high schools.
Mhm.
That doesn't mean that football is going to go away. There's going to be, you know, entrepreneurs are going to pop up and there'll be more and more private football clubs. And then that's fine. I mean, parents won't get a chance to make the choice. I just have a problem with kids under 18 being signed up for football before, you know, they're the age of consent. You know, parents are putting them in danger without them even having any say, and, you know, before the age of 18.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and speaking of kids, youth sports is another chapter in your book. My kids now are 12 and 9. My 9-year-old son is playing baseball in a rec league. There's been pressure already at age 9, to join a travel league. We're going to test that out with just 1 month of travel ball this year. But I mean, I think about so much of youth sports being maybe ruined by the parents, in various ways. What have you identified as some of the biggest issues that need to be addressed in youth sports?
Well, first of all, I think that there's too much adult in youth sports. I mean, the pickup games and stuff are long gone. Now adults, you know, throw their kids in the van and drive them to practice, etc. Everything's driven by adults. And what we're seeing is adults putting their win at all costs and profit all costs actually ideals on the youth sports. And, you know, one problem is referees are dropping like crazy. There's a shortage of sports officials because they're getting abused by parents and coaches. And the sad part with kids is the pressure to specialize in one sport at ages like 9 year round. There's these youth sports entrepreneurs create these travel clubs and showcase tournaments, etc. And there's a lot of pressure on the kids and the parents. Like, if you don't continue to participate, you're going to fall behind the other kids, etc. What happens though is year-round athletes, they have more injuries, overuse injuries, and they burn out quicker. I mean, 80% of kids now are dropping out of youth sports at the age of 13, by the age of 13, which tells you there's a problem. And in surveys with these kids, the one reason they drop out is it's not fun. And then the follow-up question is why? And they talk about overzealous coaches and parents as the reason.
Wow. And then again, I think you've also addressed the issue of the emphasis, even in the schools, on varsity teams over physical education. When I think about the specialization issue, also, I mentioned that to somebody, and they had talking about baseball, and when I listen to Tim Corbin here, the head coach at Vanderbilt, he talks about how he's looking for athletes that have played basketball, played hockey, and he always warns parents against specialization. I've heard other great coaches say that too. On the other hand, this other person I was talking to said, well, what about like the Dominican Republic? Those kids are specializing in baseball all year round. They love the game. You see so many players per capita coming out of that place, and kind of had a contrarian argument about the issue of specialization. I mean, is it necessary to specialize to become an elite player or not?
No, it's good to hear what Coach Corbin's doing there at Vanderbilt, because even though there's more of those coaches, they're still in the vast minority. But interesting tidbit, there was a shortstop here. I live in Colorado for the Colorado Rockies named Troy Tulowitzki, who would run a winter baseball camp for kids, and he would tell people that within 15 minutes I can tell you who's the baseball only players and who are the multi-sport athletes. And they asked why, and he says the baseball only athletes become very robotic in their movements, they're not as fluid. The multi-sport athletes have developed other muscles and movements and ligaments, etc. And he said they move much more fluidly. They might not have the skill set yet, but they're much more fluid athletes. And the ironic thing is, for the people that push year-round specialization, there's studies out there that show by the time they get to the later high school years and college years, the multi-sport athletes actually go farther than the kids that specialized early on. In my kids' experience, we went to a meeting for a club sport, and they were 9 or 10 years old, and the coach or director of this club sport basketball team comes out and starts talking about how many kids in their program got college scholarships, etc. That was the whole selling point, not the holistic development of the kids or anything like that. And these are 10-year-olds, not high school junior.
Right.
So that's what sells with parents. And unfortunately, parents put a lot of money into these things, and by 13, a lot of them have burned out. I had an intern working for me who played baseball year-round. Dad was a coach, and that was his year-round sport. And he said, by the time I got to be a junior in high school, it would make me physically ill to pick up a bat and see play baseball anymore. So he just said I had to quit, and his dad didn't speak to him for 6 months. But that's the issue. It's like probably the same for you. I grew up playing multiple sports, and by the end of one season, I was ready to take on the next sport. I can't imagine playing year-round at a highly competitive level all the time.
Yeah. Well, I mean, my son loves baseball so much. The last thing I want to have happen is that he burns out, that he gets tired of it, that adults ruin it for him. I just want him to love it as long as he can, and become a college player if he has the ability and the desire to do it. But there's a long way between now and then. So you've mentioned this a couple of times, and it's two themes that come up in the book quite a bit. This problems of the win at all costs and profit at all costs. And, why is it a bad thing for a sports organization to try to win? Why is it a bad thing for a pro sports team, even a college athletic department, to try to make money? Like, tell us what the problems have developed through those two, win at all costs and profit at all costs.
Yeah, well, I'll start at the youth level. I'm not of the school of every athlete at youth level should get a ribbon or a trophy, because I don't believe in that either. The problem isn't striving to win. That's a big reason to play sports, is you strive to win and compete with others who help you get better. It's the winning at all costs. It's like, when a coach will only play the 5 starters the entire game, and the kids sit on the bench the rest of the time because the coach wanted to win so bad. It's year-round sports at that age, I think, is win at all costs. And so the issue isn't striving to win, it's just how you go about it, I think. And the idea of money, even at the Little League level. I mean, if you go back and look at the history of Little League baseball, it was started by, I believe, by a guy who was like in a sporting goods store or something, and they started sponsoring local teams. And so the local hardware store, whoever that sponsors the Little League team, isn't a problem, because that allows them to have uniforms and play games. But it's like if it's the entrepreneurs that create these showcase tournaments that, or the travel teams or the AAU teams that say, you have to do this or you're not going to be on the team. I mean, the sad part is the gap in youth sports between the haves and have-nots keeps growing, because lower middle class and lower class families just can't afford $15,000 a year. That's what it costs sometimes to play year-round on a single sport by traveling to tournaments. There's really no reason why a club soccer team has to travel across 3 states to play other good soccer teams when they can play the high-level teams in their own state. I mean, 12-year-olds aren't being recruited or by colleges, or at least they shouldn't be, I hope.
No kidding.
But, yeah.
And not only priced out of travel ball, but priced out of attending a game even. I mean, I know there's also the issue of becoming a nation of spectators and not participants, but the problem of even being a spectator, I mean, most of the average families, I was looking at things we could do over spring break, and I'm not going to spend $100 a ticket to go to Nashville Predators game, or the Warriors are playing the Grizzlies. We could have driven over to Memphis, but those tickets are $150, are the cheapest ones that you can find online now per ticket. So, I mean, I think I've seen other studies that say that like the average person is going to be priced out of attending in person, and there will be an emphasis on these third locations. It's not being there, it's not watching on TV, but maybe it's like the Deer District, outside the Milwaukee Bucks games that became so popular, or these downtown venues in Kansas City where everybody was watching the soccer games in the World Cup. But a different experience where you're not even a real spectator at the game because of the profit at all costs mentality.
Yeah, there was actually many years ago, the Final Four was held in Denver, and that was before they played in the giant stadiums. But we figured out that less than 5% of local people were going to be able to go to the games that were held in Denver because so many tickets are reserved for corporations and teams, etc. So we created a special event at a local theater and had tickets, for $5 to come to the local theater, and everyone could gather, and turned out to be a good event because people were wearing their school colors, etc. But yeah, it's a shame that they can't be there in person. But like you said, I think there are going to be more and more opportunities where people can gather. One of the cool things that the Colorado Rockies still do is they have a rock pile section out in deep center field that people can get $5 tickets still to go watch a Major League Baseball game, which is
that's great,
almost unheard of. But otherwise, I think people are going to have to go to high school games, which are still, fairly easy to do price wise, and the professional sports, too many people are just going to have to watch on TV or streaming these days.
As a Green Bay Packers fan, I was happy to see you sort of endorse the community ownership model. Other than a Packer model, like what are the aspects of more community involvement with their professional sports franchises that are feasible that you could see on the horizon?
Well, yeah, just to touch on the Packers model, though, the community ownership versus situations like in Buffalo, where the Pagula family, which owns the team, the Pagulas are worth $5.8 billion, their net worth, and yet they basically held the city and state hostage in order to get $850 million towards a new sports palace that they could have their business in a sport that the value of the franchises are going up every year. So It's just ridiculous. I mean, it's pro sports leagues in this country are unregulated sports monopolies, basically, and they can hold these cities hostage. And it's a very cool story that a town like Green Bay can still have a team, and even though Milwaukee's a big part of it. But in terms of your question, what fans can do, I think there's a couple things like create fan councils. Some teams allow a fan council where every periodically they'll meet with fans about their concerns over concession prices or parking or things like that. One of the things that drives me crazy is the PSLs, or personal seat licenses, that these teams charge a ton of money just for the right to buy their season tickets, and it's things like that. Unfortunately, that fans don't have a lot of clout other than boycotting, and then it's kind of cutting off your nose to spite your face, or whatever that saying is. If you love football and you love the team, all you can do is be a loud voice, boycott, push for fan councils and accountability committees and things like that. The toughest way to get involved is at the pro level, I think, rather than high school or college levels, where one instance is Title IX. Parents have been very successful in pushing for equal opportunity for girls at schools through complaints to the Office of Civil Rights, or even lawsuits and stuff like that, or getting involved in the Little League board if there's something that you see is wrong. So there's plenty of ways to get involved, usually at the grassroots level, I think, is the best way to do it.
Okay. That's great. Yeah, we have a Commodore Fan Council that meets here every couple of months at Vanderbilt, and they bring up issues like that. It's nice to hear that that's a recommendation. Another recommendation of yours is to establish a National Sports Commission, which is done, and I assume in most other countries, but we really don't have something like that here. What would the role of a National Sports Commission be in your mind?
Well, for example, Canada has a national sports commission, and they create a national sports policy in terms of the government priorities in terms of funding broad-based sports participation for all citizens versus Olympic sports or pro sports. So it kind of outlines how they prioritize sports participation in the country. They also come up with a national code of sports ethics. Australia has a similar sports commission. Like you said, most countries either have a national sports commission or a sports minister that kind of oversees that area. Whereas in the United States, it's a free-for-all. Basically, sports policy is established at the pro sports level, and then that kind of ethos or policies drip down to college and youth and high school levels, and you see the commercialization and professionalization that's at the pro level drop into the college levels, which drops into the high school levels, and now the youth levels. And one thing that's on the books already is called the Ted Stevens Sports Act, which when it was created, it was a bipartisan thing in Washington, D.C., if you can imagine anything bipartisan. But it was designed to promote broad-based sports participation along with funding the national governing boards of the various sports. But instead of spending time and money on creating sports for all programs to get people participating, the vast majority of the time and money goes to the various Olympic committees. And so if the priorities were just changed, the mechanism is there to push for more broad-based sports participation programs in this country.
Okay. The foreword to your book is written by Ralph Nader. And so, I think an aspect to this is having sports fans really consider themselves a consumer group, that has some sense of power. How did you connect with Ralph Nader and get him interested in this idea of sports as an issue that should matter to him?
Yeah, people find that they think I'm kidding when I say I work for Ralph Nader, but I do, and that either makes some people happy or some people mad based on his past. But he's a great guy. He's the father of the consumer movement. I knew someone who wrote a teenage level book on Ralph Nader's history, and through him I got connected with Ralph. Ralph had started this League of Fans many decades ago as truly a fans organization for things like Fans Council, or there was going to be a membership organization to try to get a coalition of fans together, but it's just so hard, as you can imagine. Fans are so diverse geographically and otherwise that it's just hard to create a fans organization. So today the name League of Fans is kind of a misnomer. We're more of a overall sports policy think tank type thing where we research and study various issues, but we just kept the name. But yeah, Ralph is, people don't know he's a diehard Yankees fan. Lou Gehrig's his hero. There's only one photo in his office, and it's a giant painting of Lou Gehrig, and he just appreciated his work ethic and integrity, and he carries that in his day-to-day life. And he just sees the problems in sports with consumers and other stakeholders that he sees in other areas that he works in. And so he created multiple organizations, League of Fans just being one of them.
You mentioned that it's more of a grassroots or a think tank type of organization now. How can people either follow the work that's being done there, or express their opinion or their voice in terms of League of Fans?
Well, we have a website called leagueoffans.org, and I write a regular blog for that, and also have a syndicated column that is also on leagueoffans.org and through Troy Media and other outlets. I have written several books besides How We Can Save Sports, a game plan that they can find on League of Fans and through Amazon, Barnes and Noble, and other places. And we're always looking for input from readers or viewers on, I get emails all the time on, I have this problem locally, or what can I do? And so, they can reach out to us at League of Fans, and we'd be glad to interact with them on whatever issue they're dealing with.
All right. Well, I love it. And I love one of the concluding comments you had is to think of citizenship through sports activism, and I love that philosophy, and so much more you address in the book. We don't want to give the whole thing away, but encourage people to pick up a copy of How We Can Save Sports. You mentioned, where you can find it. Ken, thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, I appreciate it. It's good talking to you, and I love the work you do. So keep up the good work.
All right, you too, Ken. Thank you.
Thank you.